The Wylderwood Chapter 8. Lochlan hacked his way eastward, as best as he could judge. It was prickly and dark, but the Wylderwood was alive with lights, many of them hopping, flapping, and slithering about. Soon the brush grew thicker still, and his arm grew heavy from chopping. Finally, he found a bit of path running into the trees. It didn't run perfectly east, but followed the curve of a small river. After a long moment, Lochlan decided his arm needed the brake, and he took the path. Stumbling along, his mind was queasy with rolling thoughts. His parents had always given him the best of everything. They had carefully chosen Sir Rancyr to be his master and told him to follow the paladin's teachings without question. But why had Sir Rancyr joined with the warlock? Lochlan was only a squire and couldn't expect to be told everything, but if this was all part of a plan, why wouldn't the plan include him? And what if Sir Rancyr had expected his squire to stay in the city? Or even worse, what if he was supposed to have followed along? Lochlan's master usually told him exactly what to do, down to the last little detail, so it was confusing to find himself without guidance. "His shield defends us," he prayed to Orlam as he went. The path grew narrower, squeezed between the bank and the river, but was still easy enough to follow. The night air grew cooler. As Lochlan walked, a thin fog developed, condensing on his armor and chilling him to the bone. He tried not to think about what Nezzy had said, because he felt so sick to his stomach whenever he did. Either Nezzy was lying, or Sir Rancyr had betrayed them. Lochlan felt sure that Sir Rancyr wouldn't stab someone in the back, but he was also sure that Nezzy was telling the truth, which meant he really wasn't sure of anything. And Harks! After being so ridiculous on the way to Edgewater, making fun of him every chance she got, it was Harks that had stopped the braided elf from killing him in the street. He got goosebumps remembering his fear. The swordsman had sprung up out of the shadow so quickly that Lochlan was lucky to get his shield up in time. He'd fought as well as he ever had in training, but the elf's quick and unpredictable strikes had overwhelmed him. He felt like a child again on his first day of sparring practice. If Harks hadn't come? Lochlan didn't like to think of what could have happened. The path ran on through the fog and Lochlan followed it like a zombie. Exhausted, but afraid that if he stopped, he wouldn't be able to start again. In truth, he could no longer say which direction he was going, but through the fog, he spied a familiar shape. It was a tower, like those in Edgewater, surely an outpost of the Frosker guards. Maybe he could find help. He broke into a run, eager to be safe, and he heard heavy steps coming down the stairs. "Hello!" he cried. "I came with the sail train. Could you tell me—" He stopped speaking and stopped running at the same time. A heavy-set figure stepped into the doorway, and just by the shape of the shadow, Lochlan knew it was a troll.
"Look, here comes dessert!"
it roared, and an ugly laughter poured out of the tower behind it. A slithering noise came from behind, and Lochlan turned to see a group of dross scuttle from the trees. Surrounded, Lochlan thought. Luckily, he'd trained for this. He could still remember Sir Rancyr's voice.
"When you have surrendered, pick your spot and cut your way through."
"For Orlam!" Lochlan bellowed and ran forward, his armor clanking. He charged the troll like it was one of the training dummies, shield high and sword forward, and he yelled loudly as he ran to try to cover his fear. The troll hesitated a moment before stepping out of the outpost, and it was all Lochlan needed. He feinted a sword swing and then slid low under the troll's club-like arm.
"Get back here!"
the beast roared, but Lochlan lowered his head and charged on. There was no way he would win a fight against a troll, but he thought he could outrun it. He followed the path as it wove and turned through the forest. The troll's heavy footsteps kept close behind him, and dross slithered and scritched in the brush. It occurred to him that he was going the wrong way now, deeper into the Wylderwood, but it didn't matter. As long as the troll and the dross couldn't catch him, he didn't care where the path led. Not get crushed first, find the way out second. Lochlan ran on until the path ended at what looked like a low wooden bridge heading out into the water. The other side was lost in the fog, but he could hear the troll closing in on him, so he started running across. After just a few dozen steps, he heard the troll's heavy feet hit the wooden boards and felt the bridge shake beneath him. There was no turning back, and that was when Lochlan saw he wasn't on a bridge at all, but a dock, and he was almost at the end. The troll laughed behind him. "Ah ha ha! Trapped!" it cackled. Lochlan knew he wouldn't be able to swim far with his armor on, but he didn't know what else to do. There was no way he would win in a fight, but at least in the water he would have a chance. Lochlan reached the end of the dock, troll on his heels, and dove into the water. He braced himself to splash and sink, ready to undo the straps on his armor and abandon it if he had to. But the splash never came. Instead, Lochlan slid on his belly across the top of a giant lily pad. It wobbled and bobbed, but it held his weight. The troll roared behind him, and Lochlan got to his feet. Ahead, another giant lily pad bloomed before his eyes, beckoning him across the water. With a grin, Lochlan started to run. He leapt from pad to pad, sometimes jumping before the next pad was fully bloomed. When he reached the far shore, he turned to watch the troll. The heavy brute jumped from the dock to the first lily pad. Just before he landed, though, the pad turned into bubbles and drifted away. The troll splashed into the water and started sinking, yelling at the others in the tower. Lochlan hoped the dross would stop too, but they jumped in after him, ignoring the troll completely. He paused for a moment, unsure of which way to go, and then he heard a scream off in the woods. It was distant, but the voice was all too familiar. "Nezzy!" Lochlan said, and then he charged into the woods to help his friend. Harks held one hand in front of her as she walked, a mote of flame bobbing like a torch. By its flimsy light, she picked her way among the plants. She looked calm, determined even, but inside, she was a bonfire of sadness and anger. Today had been the worst day of her life, and now she was alone in the Wylderwood, far past the edge of any map. She had tried to follow their own trail back to the wall, but truthfully, she wasn't much good in the woods. She was starting to get the terrible feeling that she may be lost, but what choice did she have? Nezzy was heading into the woods because of a voice in her head, which couldn't end well. Lochlan had lost his master and was probably miles away, on the road out of the Wylderwood. Even the strange halfling prisoner had disappeared. Harks shivered, alone, miserable, and wishing she had a friend. If no friends were around, then she would settle for a good winter cloak. A bigger fire would have been best, but if she lost control, this whole patch of forest could burn up. So she trudged along, shivering. To keep herself company, she hummed a tune that she had picked up in the Frosker market. It seemed impossible that her walk with Nezzy had been just a few short hours ago. They had thought their adventure was just beginning. They would all go into the Wylderwood together with the masters leading to do some ritual on some artifact. They had said it was a book at the council, and that it had some power. Harks guessed it was a spell book, but she had heard too many stories of weird magic to assume she was right. Bobbidin will know, she thought automatically. Bobbidin always knows. Harks cut off the thought and hummed louder, the little mote of fire flaring in her hand for a moment. She didn't want to think about Bobbidin. He was sort of crazy and definitely disorganized, but her master had been nicer to her than anyone she could remember. When she was little and her hands had started smoking, her tiny village labeled her a witch. It was only Bobbidin's intervention that had stopped them from throwing her in a dungeon. Shelsani had saved him, sort of, if being frozen as a tree counted as saved. Harks knew that there was nothing she could do for him. Druid magic was as hard for her as dancing was for a Hyrax, but she felt drawn back to him anyway. In her heart, she knew it wasn't for his benefit that she wanted to go, but because it would comfort her to be near him, even if he was a tree. Maybe she could put a swing in his branches. He'd have liked that. Harks shivered again, a steady wind blowing across her as she walked. She felt small, listening to the looming trees creak and groan like rusty hinges. She came to a tumble of large rocks across her path, and while she managed to edge around them, her robe caught on a branch of dragontooth burrs. She could feel the prickles of them through the cloth and stopped to pull them free. A voice above called out in excitement. "Ah, there you are!" Harks darted forward, feeling a rope brush past her and footsteps behind her as she went. "Run for it, Firebrand! But Thalos won't lose your trail, even on land!" Harks wanted to fire away with sorcery, but she'd only catch herself in the flames when the Wylderwood burned. She was as terrified as ever, maybe even more so because she was alone, but old habits die hard and words were coming out of her lips before she could even think to stop them. "Come on then, Captain Clambeard," she shouted. "You couldn't catch a fish if you fell off your boat." She roared, and Harks felt the wind of a throwing axe as it spun past her ear. "I'll tie you to me mast!" Thalos hollered, footsteps closing in. "If you want me to come hang out at your boat, just say so," Harks chirped back, but she was panting now. The Wylderwood was thick around her, the light coming in bits and patches. She dodged around one side of a cliff and came face to face with a wall of rock, spinning around wildly. Harks couldn't see the pirate yet, but she knew she was right behind her. "Trapped! I'm trapped!" Harks thought frantically. Seeing no other choice, her arms began to smoke as she prepared a searing sorcery. And then, the tree in front of her started to glow. It was a gentle light, the same wizardly blue as Bobbidin's robes. Harks reached for it, mesmerized, and a branch sprouted into her hand. Another sprouted just above, and another. A ladder, Harks realized, every rung alight with glowing blue. She started scrambling up the branches, sometimes grabbing the next one even as it was still growing out of the tree. The pirate called from below. "Ho-ho! Well done, Firebrand! If only me crew could climb the rigging so quick!" Thalos started up the ladder, climbing like a monkey. In a flash, she was just a dozen feet below and gaining quickly. Thankfully, Harks found herself level with the top of the cliff and leapt from the branch to the stony ground. She rolled to a stop and heard a snap. For a moment, she thought she'd broken something, and then she saw it was the ladder. As soon as Harks had stepped off, the branches had dried and snapped, and that meant... She heard a curse and a terrible crash as the pirate tumbled back to the ground, a dead stick in each fist. Harks smiled, but then she heard a shout from the other direction that sounded familiar. "Nezzy!" she screamed back. "I'm coming!" To be continued. Thanks for listening!